30 agonizing minutes crawled by each one, amplifying the knot of disbelief in my stomach. Finally, I found myself once more fixated on the $60,000 wire transfer receipt. There it was, stark and undeniable. Receipt number 4, 183, timestamped, 11:46 a.m. on March 27th. Just beneath it, in the very same email thread, sat a forwarded Facebook screenshot from that exact day. My mother had brazenly posted a photo of Wyatt standing proudly in front of the barn, the caption dripping with insincere praise. So proud of our girl for stepping up when it mattered most. That sickeningly sweet sentiment had been posted at the precise moment my hard-earned money landed in their account. The timeline wasn't a mere coincidence. It was a calculated confirmation. They had known all along, and they were already systematically erasing my contributions, even as the funds became theirs. The most gut-wrenching part wasn't even the blatant rewriting of reality. It was the cold, deliberate intent behind it. They hadn't passively allowed this to happen. They had meticulously orchestrated it step by quiet, insidious step. A harsh exhale escaped my lips as I typed Receipt 4, 183 into the file name bar. Then, with a tremor in my hand, I opened my email. I searched for any semblance of gratitude. Thank you. Nothing, farm. A request for yet another payment reminder. Loan, silence. The only message from Mom read, "Hope you can get this done before Friday." Not a single expression of appreciation, not from her, not from Dad, and certainly not from Wyatt. I leaned back in my worn office chair, a sudden chill permeating the small apartment. Or perhaps, after years of emotional numbness, I was finally beginning to feel the icy sting of their betrayal. No gratitude, no recognition, no simple acknowledgement of, "We couldn't have done this without you." Just cold, hard transactions and an unwavering sense of entitlement. That was twist S5, the thanks that never materialized. My knuckles cracked audibly as I began to type the subject line, a stark declaration. Receipt 4183, the recipients Wyatt Ray CC, Della Ray Warren Ray. The body was brief, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall I was building between us. Hi Wyatt, just confirming I've removed myself from all future farm-related transactions. Please update your autopay and legal responsibility records accordingly. You should be able to coordinate directly with the bank moving forward. I didn't sign it. No signature was necessary. The truth spoke for itself. The instant I hit send, a wave of tremors washed over my chest. But it wasn't fear that shook me. It was the exhilarating sensation of release. It was the cleanest, most definitive boundary I had ever drawn, and it came with irrefutable proof. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely light, and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on in a quiet, sequential dance. A couple strolled past, their laughter, a private melody I couldn't quite decipher. For a fleeting second, I wondered what it might feel like to be truly understood without the constant, exhausting need to prove my worth. Then I sank back into my chair, and the tears finally came. Not tears of regret, but of profound grief. Not because I wished I hadn't sent the email, but because a foolish, persistent part of me had still clung to the hope that someone anyone might call might say, "You mattered. We saw you. We knew it was you all along." But the phone remained stubbornly silent. I wiped my face, the silence in the apartment heavy and familiar, until 20. Agonizing minutes later, my phone buzzed. An Instagram story notification from Wyatt. Hesitantly, I tapped the image. A dimly lit corner of the farmhouse kitchen filled the screen, a wine glass half full. Her delicate fingers carefully posed near the rim. The caption, dripping with false piety, read, "Some people are only generous when it's quiet. Once they're loud, it was never love." I stared at it for a full minute, the words sinking in like poison. That was her warning. A passive-aggressive jab cloaked in faux sensitivity. A calculated accusation designed to flip the narrative once again. She wanted me to feel guilty, to retreat into silence, to crawl back into the role of the unseen benefactor, while she basked in the spotlight. But something had shifted within me. I was done shrinking. I didn't dignify Wyatt's manipulative story with a reply. Instead, I stared at her clever little dig, letting it settle like bitter dust over everything that had already fractured inside me. Some people are only generous when it's quiet. It sounded like a folksy proverb for the naive, but to me it was simply a weapon dressed in silk. That Saturday evening, I sat curled up on my couch, the lights low mindlessly, scrolling through my social media feed. My thumb froze mid-swipe when I saw a tag under my mom's latest Facebook post. Sad when those closest to you forget where they came from. The post wasn't directly addressed to me. That was the insidious beauty of her manipulation. But the comments section was a venomous free-for-all. "She was always distant, huh?" one person wrote. "Some people change when they make a little money," another sneered. "She must have thought the farm was beneath her then, right?" Then right below a photo Wyatt had posted of herself, beaming in front of the barn, the caption, "A calculated dagger." Everything they do is performative. I felt my jaw clench so tightly it ached. The word performative hung in the air like toxic smoke, poisoning every selfless act I had performed in silence for years. She was shamelessly flipping the script, twisting my quiet restraint into calculated artifice, my sacrifices into a grotesque vanity project. That was twist S7, the feed turns against you. For a moment, I couldn't discern whether I felt more enraged or utterly heartbroken. But then it got exponentially worse. As I clicked through old memories, I noticed subtle, then glaring changes. Tags disappearing, captions rewritten. The post I had painstakingly crafted 2 years ago, proudly sharing the renovation of the North Barn, was gone. A heartfelt quote I had written on the farm's donation site my father had actually praised had vanished without a trace. Even old family photos where I stood beaming with mud-stained boots and a sunburnt smile were suddenly cropped just enough to meticulously excise me from the shared history. It was happening in real time. Not just gaslighting. This was digital exile twist. S10 eraser in real time. With a trembling hand, I closed my laptop, the finality of the gesture heavy in the quiet room, then I reopened it. This time I didn't log in to passively scroll, I logged in to speak. My Facebook page had been a silent tomb for months, punctuated only by the occasional obligatory birthday like or holiday post. But now it was about to become a war room. I uploaded a stark screenshot of the wire transfer receipt number 4183. Beneath it, I typed a single unwavering line. "I didn't need credit, but I won't accept erasure, receipt 4183. That was it. No dramatic flair, no sob story, just cold, hard facts. The post was live for less than 10 minutes before the comments started flooding in. "Wait, you were the one who paid for that?" one person asked, incredulity dripping from their words. "I remember seeing you in the freezing rain hauling lumber behind the barn. You never said a word about this." Private messages trickled in from former classmates, an old neighbor who had once borrowed our generator during a blackout. Even Mr. Bernal from down the road. "I always knew you were the reason they stayed afloat." He wrote his simple words carrying the weight of years of unspoken observation. By the end of the night, the post had garnered over 200 comments and shares, not viral by internet standards, but a seismic event in the small world of Greenfield. And from my family, not a single word, not even a denial. That silence was deafening, louder than any scream. Sunday morning dawned with a stark, new reality. Wyatt had restricted my access to her page, her carefully curated stories. Her highlights gone. I had been shadow removed from the meticulously crafted narrative of her perfect influencer life. And my mother, she had unfriended me. It was a petty act, but it served as undeniable confirmation. They weren't interested in healing. They weren't even embarrassed by their callous actions. They were only ashamed they had been caught. And my father, still silent, the deafening silence of a man who could have stopped this before it metastasized, but had chosen time and again not to. For once, I didn't chase after their silence. I didn't fire off a text demanding an explanation. I didn't call desperately seeking clarification. I simply closed my notifications and sat with the stillness, not the kind that ached with unanswered questions, but the kind that marked the solid, unyielding edge of a new boundary. Let them stew in the curated echo chamber they had so carefully constructed for themselves. I had the truth. I had the proof. And now finally I had a voice. As I logged off for the night, a new notification popped up, a direct message from someone I hadn't expected. Local News Weekly. Hi Odell, I came across your post about the farm. Would you be open to sharing your side of the legacy? I think people would want to hear it. I stared at the screen, then a slow, measured smile spread across my face. If they had craved public sympathy, they should have stayed quiet. I was just getting started. I hadn't even finished reading the DM from the reporter when my phone pinged again. This time, it was a message from Mrs. Lorraine, our elderly neighbor back in Greenfield. She never texted. It was always phone calls or surprise visits with freshly baked pies and scribbled notes. Seeing her name alone sent a jolt of unease through me. Your parents want to meet in person. It read. That was it. No emojis, no soft cushioning, just a stark, quiet warning dressed as simple information. I let the screen go dark in my hand and stared blankly at the opposite wall. It was coming, the inevitable confrontation I had always dreaded. But this time, I wouldn't be walking into that house empty-handed. The next morning, a folded note lay beneath my apartment door. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, Odellin. It began a forced attempt at intimacy. If there is anything left between us, come to the farm Thursday. One last time, I carefully folded the paper and placed it beside my laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a surge of misplaced sentimentality. I simply felt like someone being coldly summoned to their own trial. With a grim resolve, I pulled up the will, the copy they didn't know I possessed. I had scanned it months ago while ostensibly helping with paperwork. The one that meticulously excluded me from everything. Then I printed it, and the bank receipts, the transfer confirmations, the old emails, the invoices. As I zipped them into a neat leather folder, a stark realization washed over me. I wasn't preparing for a tearful reunion. I was meticulously prepping an exhibit for a court that would likely never admit guilt, but to which I would no longer offer my complicit silence. Thursday arrived gray and still mirroring the oppressive atmosphere I anticipated. Greenfield hadn't changed. The farm hadn't either. Same creaky gate, same chipped white paint, but everything felt smaller, diminished. Even the house, once a looming presence in my childhood memories, seemed to be shrinking in on itself. Mrs. Lorraine offered a small knowing wave from across the street. I nodded politely, a lump forming in my throat, then walked up the porch steps and knocked. My father opened the door. He looked tired, not physically older, but worn down by a lifetime of unspoken resentments and carefully constructed silences. Come in, he said, the words devoid of warmth. No hug, no smile. I stepped into the dining room. The table was already set with coffee mugs, neatly folded, napkins, even a pie. A store-bought one, I knew instinctively. Wyatt sat to the right. Arms crossed, a scowl etched on her face. A silent accusation waiting to be unleashed. Della, my mother, sat at the head of the table, her posture rigidly perfect, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. We just want to clear the air, she began, her voice tight with forced civility. My father added, his tone laced with thinly veiled resentment. You airing things online, it's made things harder for us. How? Slowly, deliberately, I laid the leather folder on the table, opened it, and spread the contents out like irrefutable evidence. This isn't about what I posted. I said, my voice even and unwavering. It's about what you did long before I said a word. I turned the will around so their own signatures were clearly visible, then pointed to the wire transfer receipt. The timestamp, a damning match to my mother's saccharine Facebook post, celebrating Wyatt. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but remained silent, her bravado momentarily deflated. But I wasn't finished. I pulled my phone from my purse and tapped the recording app, pressing play. Wyatt's voice filled the tense silence of the room, her past words now echoing with a chilling clarity. You're the one who paid for it all. I just thought they'd never take your side. Silence descended again, heavy and suffocating, then a shallow inhale from my mother, her eyes darting around the room, unsure where to land. My father pushed his chair back abruptly, the scraping sound jarring in the stillness. What is this? A setup? No, I replied, my gaze unwavering. It's accountability. Della reached forward, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the table. You're tearing this family apart. I looked her straight in the eye, the years of unspoken pain and resentment finally finding voice. No, Mom. I'm holding it together by telling the truth, something you've avoided since the beginning. Wyatt stood abruptly, her face contorted with anger. You think this makes you noble? I think it makes me sane. I countered, my voice calm, despite the storm raging within me. She shook her head, her eyes blazing. You're toxic, Odie. You've always needed a villain to feel relevant. Her words landed like a physical blow, but I refused to flinch. You know what's toxic, Wyatt? Rewriting history and pretending it's healing. Without a word, my father turned and walked out of the room. I didn't follow. My mother began to cry. Not tears of remorse, but tears of discomfort, because exposure rarely feels graceful, And Wyatt just glared at me, her voice a low, venomous whisper. You're destroying this family. I stood tall, the weight of their manipulation finally lifting. I folded my folder shut. The click of the clasp. A definitive end to years of silence. No, I said, my voice clear and resolute. I'm just done letting it destroy me. As I walked out of that house, I didn't expect applause, or an apology, or any semblance of redemption. Distance was enough. Before I even reached my car, my phone vibrated again. A new email sat in my inbox. Subject line: We'd like to feature your story in our series on financial abuse inside families. I sank behind the wheel, watching the farmhouse shrink in my rearview mirror. For years, I had stayed quiet to protect them. Now I would speak to protect myself and anyone else who had ever felt invisible. 2 days after the tense confrontation at the farm, I found myself in the sterile quiet of the local news studio waiting area, clutching a lukewarm paper cup of coffee I hadn't touched. A flickering television in the corner played a cheerful midday segment filled with updates about spring flower festivals and upcoming bake sales. It felt surreal, almost darkly comical, that my story would follow this saccharine normalcy. The receptionist offered a polite practice nod. They'll bring you in shortly. I nodded back quietly, a knot of nervous anticipation tightening in my stomach. I hadn't told anyone I was coming here. Not my coworkers, not my few friends, not even the distant cousins who had reached out privately after my Facebook post. I needed to do this on my own without the weight of anyone else's expectations or judgments. Minutes later, I was seated across from Janelle Craig, a local anchor known more for her charity fundraisers than hard-hitting interviews. But today her demeanor was serious, her voice carrying a newfound weight. The cameras rolled, the lights intensified, and her first question came softly but squarely. What does it feel like to be erased by your own family? I didn't blink. It doesn't feel like anything at first. I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands, hidden beneath the table. It's quiet, it's subtle. One day they stop mentioning your name. Next, your photos are missing from frames. Then the things you poured your heart and soul and money into become someone else's victory. It's like dying in slow motion, except you're still stuck paying the bills. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch. My voice didn't waver as I spoke about the loan. The co-signed debt, the endless receipts, the years I had single-handedly kept the farm afloat while my sister transformed it into her online branding playground. I spoke about my parents' deafening silence, not born of malice. Perhaps, but of a twisted belief that love meant sacrificing one child to save another. And then I said something I hadn't rehearsed, the words rising from a deep well of long-suppressed truth. They taught me that being the strong one meant staying quiet. I've unlearned that now. The interview wrapped after 10 intense minutes, but I knew from Janelle's empathetic expression that it would be one of the most shared clips of the week. By nightfall, it was everywhere. On Facebook, people tagged friends the simple words, this is it, echoing across countless timelines. On Reddit, a thread exploded under the stark title, Rural Family Scandals. Hundreds of comments poured in each one. A variation on the same heartbreaking theme, this is my life. I co-signed my parents' mortgage and got written out of their will too. One person wrote, she said what I've never had the guts to say, for the first time since this whole agonizing ordeal began. I didn't feel like a freak anomaly, a singular victim of inexplicable cruelty. Instead, I felt like a thread in a vast, intricate tapestry of people who had poured their everything into family and received only ghosting in return. Strangers became a mirror reflecting a pain I had carried in isolation for far too long. I wasn't alone. Wyatt, of course, had her own carefully curated version of events. She posted a muted Instagram story, a fleeting glimpse of her sipping coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, the caption dripping with thinly veiled disdain. Some people really love drama. No names, no context, just enough venom to keep her loyal followers on her side. My mother, in a more decisive move, deactivated her entire Facebook profile. By Sunday morning, her last visible post before she vanished from the digital landscape was a blurry photo of an old quilt accompanied by the cryptic words, "Some bonds are better left in the past." My father's silence finally broke, not with an apology, not with an explanation, but with a single chilling text message, "Don't contact us again." I stared at it for a long moment, the finality of those words sinking in like a stone. Then, with a strange sense of detachment, I deleted the entire thread. I didn't feel gutted. I didn't feel victorious either. Just clear. The desperate need to chase after their elusive approval had finally extinguished. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the streetlights cast long reflections off the parked cars. The silence in my small space felt different now, not heavy with unspoken accusations, not aching with unanswered questions, but simply real. I opened my laptop and navigated to the blog. I hadn't touched in over a year. I created a new post, titling it with a simple, poignant truth. The Invisible Daughter. I didn't rant. I didn't name names. I wrote about the insidious nature of silence, about loyalty redefined on my own terms, about the crushing weight of unacknowledged love, about the years it takes to finally realize. You were never asking for praise, just presence. You don't have to scream to be heard. I wrote the words flowing freely, cathartically, but you do have to stop whispering. I hit publish the act. A quiet declaration of independence. A few minutes later, my email dinged. It was from a nonprofit I'd never heard of. Subject: invitation to speak at our spring summit on financial abuse within families. The message was brief but powerful. We saw your interview. Your story is powerful. Would you consider sharing it with others going through the same thing? I leaned back in my chair, a steady warmth spreading through my chest. Maybe I was never meant to save the farm. Maybe I was meant to save myself, and in doing so, offer a lifeline to others who had also been made to feel invisible. 3 weeks later, I stood backstage at the Spring Summit Hall, the low hum of the gathering crowd. A palpable energy in the air. The walls were adorned with soft banners that read, "Redefining Family, Reclaiming Voice." Just beneath the bright stage lights, my name appeared on a screen in elegant serif white letters. Keynote speaker, Odell Ray. I exhaled slowly, a sense of calm settling over the nervous flutter in my stomach. Behind me, a volunteer gently adjusted my microphone. "You're up in 2. She whispered, her smile encouraging. I gave a small nod, my hands surprisingly steady on the note cards I had painstakingly written and rewritten for days. But by the time the announcer called my name, a quiet confidence had taken root. I didn't glance at the cards once. I stepped onto the stage, the room filled with dozens of strangers from different states, different lives, different fractured families falling still. The hush wasn't nervous, it was reverent, expectant. I took a breath, the microphone amplifying the sound. I used to think being a good daughter meant being quiet. My voice was steady. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because I was no longer ashamed. I used to believe that if I gave more, loved harder, bent further, maybe they'd finally see me. And when they didn't, I assumed I simply hadn't earned it yet. A ripple of understanding moved through the room. Heads nodded in silent acknowledgement, arms folded tighter in shared recognition of a familiar pain. I met eyes with a woman in the front row, her face etched with years of unspoken sorrow. A tissue clutched tightly in her trembling hands. She was already crying, and she didn't try to hide it. But silence doesn't equal peace. I continued, my voice resonating with newfound conviction. And sacrifice doesn't guarantee love. Twist S14. The silent apology wasn't in the mail or in anyone's inbox. It was in this moment, this room, this collective response. Before I could even deliver my closing remarks, the crowd rose to their feet. For a fleeting moment, I couldn't even see the podium, just a sea of faces. A wave of applause washing over me like they needed to remind themselves, and perhaps me too, that it wasn't too late to stop giving their best to people who couldn't or wouldn't say thank you. After the talk, I stayed near the side of the stage as people approached me, some hesitantly, some with the familiarity of long-lost siblings. A few simply offered a quiet, "Thank you." Their eyes filled with a depth of understanding that transcended words. One woman gripped both my hands, her voice thick with emotion, and whispered, "I left my family's farm last year, but I still cry when I see tractors." I understood her completely, the shared history of sacrifice and silent suffering binding us together. Another asked, her voice trembling slightly, "How did you finally know it was time to stop helping them?" My answer came easier than I ever would have imagined, when I realized I was the only one helping at all. Later that week, back in my quiet apartment, a certified envelope waited in my mailbox. The name on the return address stopped me cold. Della Ray, my mother. I brought it inside, the weight of the unknown heavy in my hand, and placed it on the kitchen counter. I stared at it while the kettle whistled the steam, a silent question mark in the air. For a moment, the urge to tear it open to finally hear some semblance of acknowledgement was almost overwhelming. But then, with a decisive movement, I slid it into the drawer next to my checkbook and closed it without a word. Some letters aren't meant to be read. Some apologies aren't meant to be unpacked. The silence between us had become an answer in itself. 2 days later, I unlocked the doors to a new space, a project I had been quietly building for months, a co-working hub for women in transition, divorcees, survivors, single mothers, founders, artists. Nobody needed to explain why they were there, only what they needed next. On one exposed brick wall, we had painted a quote in bold cream letters, "Be your own proof." Mid-morning, as I was wiping down a table near the back, a familiar voice called out, a hint of wry amusement in its tone. "Well, look what you built instead of a barn." I turned to see Mrs. Lorraine standing at the threshold, a vibrant splash of color in a cherry-red cardigan, holding a cheerful bouquet of sunflowers. "I always said you were the root that kept them from floating away," she said, her eyes twinkling with warmth. "Now I see you were meant to plant your own field." I smiled, and this time it wasn't a forced, polite gesture. It reached my eyes, a genuine expression of hope and burgeoning self-acceptance. I hadn't saved Ray Farm, but I had saved something far more precious, myself. The last part of the day passed in a quiet hum of productivity and shared purpose. I closed up the workspace around 5, then headed upstairs to the small loft I had recently moved into. Simpler than my old place, but filled with a light that felt like a fresh start. The sun was beginning its slow descent outside the window. I stood with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the golden light stretch long across the floorboards. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone's text. I wasn't hoping for an apology that would arrive too late or land too shallow. I was enough. Not just barely enough, but whole enough, like coming home to myself. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from the deafening silence of those we once called family. Odell's story serves as a powerful reminder that speaking up isn't an act of revenge. It's an act of profound self-preservation, a necessary step towards reclaiming your own narrative and your own worth. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved or thought you loved simply to protect your own peace? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters. And if this deeply personal family drama resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that dare to speak the truths we're often too afraid to say out loud. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video.